Jackie. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't already, we'd love for you to sign in before leaving tonight, just so we know who's coming to which talks. So today we're going to hear from Charlotte Westing. She's working with Alaska Department of Fish and Game. I'm sure many, if not all of you, know her already. She's going to talk to us today about the Sitka black-tailed deer population in Prince William Sound. Charlotte?
All right. Okay, so how many people were here when I gave my last talk about deer from Prince William Sound? Hey, okay, not bad. All right, so I've been the area biologist for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. My name is Charlotte Westing, for almost 13 years. And I realized that the last time I gave a talk about deer was in 2014. So we had a lot to talk about at that time. We had a big winter recently. People really had a bunch of questions. We've had some management actions that we've taken that I felt like I needed to explain why and what warranted those situations. So things have really changed. Realized it's been too long, and I need to get here and hope to get here to talk about other species that I have also been neglecting without going so long. So I'm going to talk about what we think we know, what we don't know, what we wish we knew, and what we're doing about it. And I can't really talk that much about what Fish and Game is doing in this area without recognizing Samantha Renner, because she's my runner games, and I can't really do anything without her help and support. So I'll tell you just a brief overview of how I'm going to structure things. I'm going to go in a little bit to the basic biology of Sitka black-tailed deer, then talk about how we assess the population, and that's going to include a discussion of things we've been doing and then what we're kind of transitioning to. Then just generally where I think the population is, what our harvest assessments suggest is going on there. And then just big picture, like what do we do for deer management? There's a lot that we can't do, and kind of clarify a little bit of that, and then talk about what you can do to help us do a better job. So of course, Sitka black-tailed deer occur at the northernmost extent of their range, and they had a little boost to be here. They didn't occur here naturally. They were brought here sometime between 1916 and 1923. It's a fascinating story. Basically, a young guy with a border collie just like rained hell upon deer in Southeast and hobbled them up and shipped them up on a boat, and the rest is history. They did what deer do. They put at least 24 on Hawkins and Hindenburg, but of course the record keeping is pretty loose at that time, and I have no idea how many deer were killed in the process, but probably quite a few. But deer got here. Our deer can really reproduce in good conditions really fast. So we started having legal deer hunting in 1935. And then we believe the population peaked in about 1945. And I found records from the previous game biologist that show that at the time, he was begging people to approve a dose. He was like, I feel like we're getting to the point where we're exceeding what the habitat can support, but I cannot get people to kill does for all the money in the world. We have overcome that problem. The community doesn't really have a problem shooting does anymore, and it's part of what we do, but it's also a tool that we can kind of use to tip the balance with does if we're careful or not careful. So giving you some of that biological natural history. There are subspecies of mule deer. Scientific name there shows that they're subspecies. They're native to Southeast and British Columbia, but not here. Smaller, stockier, short face. I used to have some weight estimates in here, but I found a lot of conflicting reports. And most of you have packed out a deer on your back, and you know very well how much they weigh. Not as much as other species, but it's plenty when you're 1,500 feet up the mountain. Their average lifespan about 10 years. I saw had a really ancient doe brought into me today. If you ever shoot a deer that's really interesting to you, like it seems it's different, like it's just something doesn't look the way you think it should or has in the past, just bring it to me. I'll take a look. So they were like, man, this deer doesn't have that many teeth. Well, it was just incisors, and the incisors aren't really that telling. A lot of animals break off their incisors. She had 3. But when I cut back to look at her molars, they were really, really worn down. So I can pull a tooth, an incisor. We can cross-section that tooth and age it like the rings on a tree. They put down annuli for every year of their life. and I can conclusively determine how old that deer is. And I told him I'm guessing it's probably going to be 15 or older. So animals like that are really interesting to get our hands on. And I talked to him about some other health measures we can look at, like bone marrow quality, that will just give me some indications of what's going on in the population. Snow depth and duration is the most important limiting factor. So as a manager, I like to feel like I'm kind of important, but really the biggest thing that's going to kill deer is snow. Anything snow depths that are past brisket height are very hard for them. They extend a lot of a lot of energy just working through it, and it just buries the food. So with that in mind, they're really dependent on old growth forests with gaps in canopy that just allow a lot of different kinds of vegetation to grow, but also protect them from those deep snows. So they breed in mid to late November, and in some of the data that I'm going to show you in a little bit that we picked up with our cameras, I've seen really big jumps in activity in between about November 13th and November 19th. And so some of the data we're collecting can help us get a little better feel of when the peak of breeding and rut activity happened. That's kind of an interesting little extra piece that we're getting from collecting some of those data. But it's not something that's ever really fine tuned. People are always asking me when the rut is, when is your rut here? And it's going to vary. And then how different people define rut, it's very different. Females usually breed in their second year of life, so that's a little bit unique. Other ungulates can wait till 3, goats wait till about 4. It's not that they're waiting, it's not that they have like wonderful morals or something. It's just that their body condition isn't conducive for them to get pregnant earlier. But these deer probably often do get pregnant in that second year of life. They produce fawns until they're 10, 12 years old, probably longer. This concept of senescence in animals, that they get to a point where they're so old that they're not reproducing anymore, hasn't really been supported that well by the science. Because generally, if you're getting to the point that you're not fat enough to get pregnant, you're also probably not fat enough to really heartily make it through a bad winter. So it'll probably kill you before it makes it to where you're not breeding. Fawns are born in early June, and females between 5 and 10 often give birth to 2 fawns. So 20 rates, especially during these mild winters like we had last year, I think go up quite a bit. So all of this is why the introduction of deer in this area was really successful. So for habitat, they need uneven, aged, old growth forests. They like to be in that 1500 and higher during that summer. Alpine, we say greater than 1800 is what they need more than others, and then they move down as the season progresses. They can congregate in these heavily timbered areas, and they need to do that during these deep snow events. In the summer, they're eating that really herbaceous vegetation and green leaves and shrubs. And that includes sweetgale and blueberries, which it's not, I don't think the use of sweetgale has been documented in a whole bunch of places, but it's been documented here. And in the winter, they're focusing more on evergreen forbs. There's bunchberry, trailing bramble, but they can use blueberry, yellow cedar, arboreal lichens, hemlock, and kelp. And kelp is this $1 million question, because a lot of times people are like, deer on the beach, and they're so desperate for food that they're eating kelp. And we've never studied how much deer eat kelp on easy winters. We don't know that they don't really eat kelp on easy winters. It's just that we really notice that they eat kelp when we're really focusing our time on the beach. I suspect that, a nice salty plant, ungulates like salt, that they don't really mind eating it. And I don't see why it wouldn't be high in nutritive value, but it's just something we've never really looked at. Like, how important a deer, and is it a sign of like a death knell, or is it just something that they can eat and might as well? So hunting opportunity in this area, our season starts August 1st and then goes to December 31st. Residents can shoot 5 deer. The non-resident bag limit's 4, but you can only take until you get to October, and then you can take either bucks or doe. And then there's a federal season that begins in January and is just for the month of January. And during that time on federal land, if you're a federally qualified user, you can take one deer if a deer remains on your bag limit. So it's a little bit complicated. You can't just, I got 4 tags left, I'm gonna go. And in January, a lot of the way that, the way a lot of people would be hunting is perhaps pursuing deer that are down on the beach. If they're down on the beach and they're below the mean high water mark, they're not on federal land. Also, if you shoot them from your boat, you're not on federal land either. So it's a little bit complicated for people to take part in. And the take-home message here is just know what the rule is, talk to people at the Forest Service. They can help walk you through it. I can help walk you through it. Have a reg book of both kinds. And that opportunity is there. Occasionally, we modify the season by emergency order. The year of the big snow in 2011, that season was shortened a bit that year, or let's see. Yeah, it was $1 and shortened in the December portion. And then the following in 2013, sorry, it was 12, wasn't the big winter. There's always this question of like, when you get a ton of snow, is it just going to keep snowing for the rest of the winter, or is it going to turn to rain and then all disappear? So I think there was some thought in 2011 that it could turn to rain and disappear, and then it just kind of didn't. It just kind of kept piling on. So then in 12, we reduced the season a bit that year, and in 13, the modification that we made was you could shoot a doe, but only in October. And once you got outside of October, you couldn't shoot those anymore. And so the whole rationale there is just to allow for a faster build, because when you have breeding females in your population, you can just speed the recovery quite a bit faster. And what we were really worried about is, back-to-back hard winters that just kind of pummel the population. We went into 2011 at a high point, and there were a lot of mouths to feed. And so it will be easier in the years after that, when the population is lower and there are fewer mouths to feed for everybody to survive. But it still can, if you had bad weather back to back, that's one thing that we're worried about, is for long-term and shortening the length of time that people are dealing with a reduced population. So we have a different hunt structure here than most other parts of the state. And the reason that we have that, the reason why we have that 5-year bag limit, the reason that we have a generous feed on those, is because we expect the population to climb fast when the conditions are good and crash hard when we get a bad winter. And so the seasons are as such that we can make hay when the getting is good, and then we can we'll just have to deal with the aftermath for a while. A lot of the seasons in Southeast are much, it's much more one deer or one doe kind of seasons. It's far, depending on the areas, but yeah. Okay, so since about the late 80s, we started doing deer pellet transects here. And the way this works is we have 5 different islands in Prince William Sound. We have these different sites, and at these sites we have a tree, and the tree is marked. Raise your hand if you've ever been on a deer pellet transect. Oh yeah. Okay. All right. So we got a marked tree, and at that marked tree we have a designated admit. So it's the bearing on your compass that you're going to use, and it's the same every time. So we start at the same tree, hiking in the same direction. It's a 2-person team, and so one of you has this little course attached to your back. And your job is just to walk on the course that your compass tells you to do. The person that's behind you, this Keegan Crowley here, is looking half a meter on either side of that course for piled food. And just keeping a tally. And so that's a 20-meter transect, 21 technically, because we have the length of 1 meter that's in between where your cord clips to your backpack and the ground. But that 20 meters we collect the total number of pellets on that transect, and that is a data point. and we call it a pole. So these are the different sites. So we've got Transect at Shipyard, 2 at Orca, 2 at Windy, 3 here on Southwest Hawkins, then Hook Point, which is an awesome day trip, Port Etches, and then we have 3 transects in Rocky Bay, 3 transects in San Juan, 3 transects on Night Island. I think it's actually 4, the split in there, and 3 on Naked. So here's your pile of turds right here, pellet group, and that's the cable that dictates that it should be counted. So we do this work in cooperation with the Forest Service, and they've been our partner on this since the very beginning. And so they bring half the staff. Most of the time they're bringing half of the people, and then we work together to fund plane trips, vessel trips, the trail mix, all the things that it takes. So they are very much a partner, and we work together to develop this, to collect this monitoring tool. So this is what we end up with. We end up with mean pellet groups per plot for every transect that we go, and this is the overall mean pellet groups per plot. And what we find is that mean pellet groups per plot is on a 1-year lag if you have a big population crash. That's basically because those animals are going to poop all winter until they die. They're going to poop until they die. And so you don't see that they're not there anymore because they were leaving their sign until the day they tipped over. So 2 points to look at here. This is that big 7. And then when we came to look at it in 12, we saw this initial drop. And then this is the full magnitude in 2013. Okay, next big winter. So you can see what pellet groups are not good at doing is little nuances of change. So when you see this happening here, that's not very telling to me. Like, oh my gosh, it's up. Oh, it's down. Like something big happened here. Probably not. But when we get to this point, I know, okay, we're back where we were before the crash. We're probably back. When I get 3 data points and they're all strong like that, I'm like, okay. And the other thing is a deer pellet transects can really only tell us what people can already pretty much tell you with the naked eye. Anybody that stomps around in the woods, they're like, your population seems high right now. And I'm like, yep. Or they'll be like, man, we lost a lot. I'm like, yep. So they're not great at detecting nuances of change, but they can give me a way to quantify when something big has happened. So then the other tools that we use are carcass counts. So anytime I see a dead deer on transect, I'm writing that down. Anytime I see live deer, I'm writing that down. Don't really consider the live deer very helpful because I talk a lot when we're hiking. This is my bear avoidance strategy. It's just not anybody who's hiked with me knows. It's just like all day long. And I don't see that many deer. Like other people will be like, we saw 8 deer. I'm like, I didn't see a thing, but they knew I was coming. Yeah, so you see 2020, I leave this data point out because we only went to Hawkins and Hinchinbrook that year because of all the things that were going on with the pandemic. So I do have data from Hawkins and Hinchinbrook for those years, but not all of the islands. And then you can see that this is where we were going into the big winter of 21. And then we had a big drop, but not another huge drop. And what I think that is that the deer we lost pretty early in the winter. That's the year that we had a lot of snow in November and December, but then January on, it just rained. And so I think that's why that second year we didn't see a further decline. This right here, I don't really know what to think about, but I know that last winter was really rainy and that dissolves pellets. So when we have snow, it kind of insulates the pellets and kind of refrigerates them. When we just have persistent rain, we see a lot more kind of what used to maybe be a pellet group, but now looks like a smudge. And that is pretty hard to quantify and catch. So I don't know that I really believe that this drop is real, but you know, it was a couple of years after is when you really start to feel like you know what's happening. Okay, so it's a pretty inexpensive way to go about collecting some information, but it definitely has some challenges and isn't overall that powerful. Huh. I don't have this one in my notes. Oh, wait. I just want this off. Okay, so these are the 5 groups. I included 24 instead of 25 because we had our vessel that we did the Tenacious. It's the boat we were planning to use this last year, and it dropped an engine. So we weren't able to get to Night Naked for this it's southern half of San Juan. So this last year's data is incomplete. So I just threw 2024 up here because it's more representative of most years. So most years, Hinchinbrook comes out on top with the highest density of deer pellets. And so we are assuming that deer pellets reflect a higher deer population. Night Island always comes in the lowest density, and we're guessing that that means that there's also not a lot of deer there. Not a lot of poop, not a lot of deer. And then usually Hawkins and Montague are kind of neck and neck for that second place position. Sometimes Naked Island comes in pretty well. And the reason that Naked, I think, tends to have a higher density than Night is because of the thermocline that runs north-south through Prince William Sound. If you're on the west side of that, you get a lot more of the precipitation as snow. If you're on the east side of that, you get more of it as rain. And so Naked Island is kind of right at the point where it could go either way. And so there are times when we can build up a pretty good population there. But Night is always a hard place to be deer. It's very steep terrain, little bitty drainages, and then they just get a lot of snow. Okay, so $1 million question is, does the amount of poop that we find correlate with the population? I think probably, but hard to say. So we wanted to try something new. Milo, when he was working at the Forest Service, and I started working with remote sensing cameras motion sensing cameras to collect information on the deer population. So from 2014 to 2016, we ran a project. We had cameras on Hawkins Island, and we got a lot of images from those. We could check them very frequently and deal with battery problems. But the other islands, we would just set it and forget it for a full year with an external battery pack and just hope for the best. So we got 2,783 trap nights from 9 cameras, and that worked out to be 1,248 deer events. And then we got deer per day for each of those locations. So, and a lot of cool photos. And I wanted to put a little montage on here for you, but just didn't have the chance to put it together. So this is what we ended up with. I plotted here in the blue the mean pellet groups per plot. So that's the data from the deer pellet transects. But then these other lines, the orange, the gray, and the yellow, are from the cameras. So you can tell, they kind of follow some of the same trends. And I think when they don't, it probably had to do with camera failure. Like here's edges, maybe orca, yeah. But anyways, it was promising, but it had some challenges. Here's another cool thing we get from it is just kind of like remote site weather data. Like, oh damn, there was some snow at this camera site. We also got temperature data that we could plot for each of those locations. It's all just ancillary, but it's just extra tools since we don't have weather monitoring capabilities at most of these remote locations. I'm trouble getting this to advance. Okay, but we had challenges. And so here's an example of the challenges. When you're doing composition data, you're trying to get how many bucks do you have, how many does do you have, how many fawns do you have. What is this right here? Button buck. The button buck. But it's pretty, you got to get a perfect look at that head to know. Anybody who's thought about pulling the trigger knows, sometimes you don't get that perfect look of the head and you got to kind of take a pass. So it was vulnerable to classification errors on both the top and the bottom of that ratio, right? Because you could misclassify a buck or you could misclassify a doe if you don't have a perfect look of the head. I think there's ways around that with photogrammetrics. If you can measure the rostrum and tell if you were dealing with an adult deer or not, but we're not there right now. Our other challenge was camera attacks. Once one animal started attacking the camera, it was like bonanza of camera attack. just like one buck hits it, and then every buck that comes by is just going to town on the camera. And then the bears also gave us many good views up their noses. So we are Milo retired. There's a new biologist at the Forest Service, and he and I got to talking about maybe a new way that we could try to use this camera data. And instead of using the camera data to achieve composition data, maybe use it to estimate population. So they're already doing this in Southeast because they abandoned deer pellet transects because of all the challenges that I was mentioning with it not being a very refined tool. They've walked away from using it, and they've been focusing all their energy on using cameras to estimate population. It's still developing. I don't think they've actually generated estimates yet, but we're piggybacking off of their efforts and mirroring their methods and working together now. So we started by taking the Forest Service habitat mapping project, which I think they did in 2018, where they took satellite imagery and then combined that with some ground truthing to classify habitat. And so what your colors are here is the red are your smaller diameter at breast height trees. The yellow are, pretty medium size, up to 21 centimeter, I think, diameter at breast height. And then the blue are your biggest giant old growth trees. And so we used 2-kilometer hexagonal grids, and that's using previous data that we have from home range of a female deer. We doubled the size of that with the hopes that we can encapsulate deer's entire home range. And then we came, so about 40%, you needed like more than 40% winter habitat to be included. And then we stratified within that low, medium, and high and have samples in each of those groups. So what you end up with is this schmettering, and we're just starting with Hawkins Island. These are all camera locations where we've been collecting these data. We set about half of them in 24. So again, this is Forest Service, Andrew Sanders, Dan Schmalzer, me, and some extra folks from each of our agencies. They purchased all the equipment. They provided most of the boat support, but I use my boat too. And then Fish and Game is providing the analysis. So trying to advance. This is what it looks like if you see one while you're out hiking around. There is a camera with a bear box and a python lock that attaches it to the tree. There's an external battery pack. And then there's this pole, and the pole has markings that indicate 10-centimeter blocks. And what that's going to do is allow us to measure snow in the pictures. The other thing that we use this pole for is to determine the zone of imprints. So cameras, you can assume, and we use other studies to build this knowledge, that they're going to be 100% accurate within a certain range, but it's not that far in front of the camera. And then everything beyond that, maybe they'll pick it up, maybe they won't. But it sets for you a point of reference. Anything within that, we're going to count. Anything outside of that, it's just gravy and we're not counting it. So if you see one of these poles, that's what it's all about. Notice it and move on. And so now I come in. We've collected all these images. We use 2 kinds of software. One of them is called Mega Detector, which sounds like a Transformer villain to me, but it's not. It's artificial intelligence. And so what artificial intelligence has done is identify that this is 100% animal. And then at the second phase of that, it gives a prediction of what it is. And I love this because he just seems perturbed. 83.6% bird. But so what it's basically doing is helping us weed out the wheat from the chaff. Is that the? Yeah, helping us sort, because you'll have tons of images that are false triggers or not within your zone of imprint. So the AI is allowing us to sort these images, classify what has an animal, and then I will come back and add all the different features. Actually, I hope to hire someone to help me with this. That then will allow our statistician or biometrician to process all that information. And what they're going to generate is time in front of the camera. So that's how much time the camera could have, in theory, captured an image of a deer, and then how much time it actually did capture a deer. And so they can estimate the population by collecting those two pieces of information. And so they've been doing it down south. They found pretty consistent estimates from year to year. You get confidence intervals, and it's turning into what we think looks like a very promising tool. So we have all the images from the first half of the cameras, and now I'm going through this second step right now. Okay, so now I'll move on to the next piece of all this, which is harvest monitoring. Here we go. We began monitoring the harvest between 1960 and 1979 by hunt reports and boat checks and just meeting with hunters. But then we started using harvest surveys in the 80s, and we used to mail them to like 30% of people who picked up deer tags or reported that they were going to go hunting. You would get a survey, and then you would fill it all out and submit it in, and then there would be a report that came from that. 2011, we switched to using the deer harvest tickets that you all are familiar with now, and that's now how we collect this. One of the things we lost is some of the precision with the reporting, because in the old days with the survey, it would basically, you have a map, and they'd say, draw a circle where you hunted, or indicate somewhere here on this map where you hunted. And we got precise information from that. Now it's free form. Some people are like, I hunted in Prince William Sound. Mic drop. Some people are like, I hunted on Hawkins Island. And some people will send you a coordinate and everything in between. So it's changed things. And if you get an email from Samantha that's like, hey, got your hunt report, but it didn't really have as much detail as we needed, like, just take a deep breath and like provide that data, because it really helps us. I'll show you why in a minute. So this shows you our total harvest. This is the big winter of 11, and it's also the year that harvest ticket data begins. So you can see a big harvest in the year that we know had big snow. And then this in 21 is another big snow year with big harvest. The other thing you see from those big snow years is that we kill more does during those years. So this is the percent of bucks in the harvest, and that always goes down in those big snow years. I don't know why 2016 was a big year for harvest. It's mostly non-local hunters in the harvest that year. I don't know what kind of dynamics were at play, but that one jumps too. So we usually kill about 1,700 deer. That's our average for 20 years is 1,700. The harvest objective and population objective that are set in legislative code are just wild ass guesses. Somebody picked that number and just threw it. Here's how much we think should be the harvest objective. We almost never hit the harvest objective. Harvest objective is 2,200 to 3,000 deer. So there aren't a lot of years that we hit that, and the years we hit it are the big snow years. So that's just another interesting artifact. All right, you're probably wondering who hunts Prince William Sound deer. So here, the local Unit 6 residents are shown in blue. And so you can see, between 300 most years. And then you have your non-local residents and your non-residents. And that's how that breakdown happens. And most of those non-local Alaska residents are hunting out of Whittier's, some hunting out of Valdez, but that's where they're starting.
When you say non-local, typically not Cordova.
So it would be Cordova, Unit 6 resident, so Cordova, Valdez, Chenega, Titlic, Whittier, but anyone else would be a non-local Alaskan. So this is just that same harvest graphic, but just shows the breakdown between those. And it's pretty consistent, but we have these jumps when we have those big snow years. This one and this one, our blue bar jumps more than the others do. So those are years that we kind of rack them and stack them here in Cordova. And you can see that when we break it down by average deer killed per hunter. Non-residents, they average usually around 0.5, half a deer. The non-locals, are usually around 1, and we're usually 1.5. But in these big years, like 21, because this is only 10 years, it doesn't have 11 in there. You can see we jump up quite a bit in those years that we have big snow. that's when we are really successful. All right, I'm having trouble getting this to advance. So here we go. This is the harvest broken down. Not quite by island. It's a by island on some of these bigger islands, but then it's grouped in Western Sound. And this was surprising to me when I put this together, because usually Montague is the one with the highest amount of harvest, and then it's followed by Hinchinbrook and Hawkins. The Western Sound and Northeastern Sound are not very high, but the presence of 21 in these data makes the Western Sound top. So what I think happened is during that big winter, a lot of people were in the sounds, because most of our participants are non-local Alaskan hunters, and they didn't have to go very far before they found deer on the beach. And our harvest in Western Prince William Sound in 21 was up 60%. So a lot of eyeballs looking for deer, and they were forced down to the beach, and we hammered them that year. So that's why in normal ranges of data, Western Prince William Sound doesn't come out that high. That year was big enough here to really make it top. So yeah, when you break down harvest by island, this is how it goes, but that is really driven by that 1 year. And yeah, so the $1 million question is how many of those deer were going to die just from the heavy snow, and they ended up instead. You never know. Okay, I have to just point at this. So this shows the average hunter effort by island. So this shows you how much of that effort goes to the Western Prince William Sound. Usually it doesn't result in that much harvest, but if the deer are there, if they get focused down on the beach, there's a lot of eyeballs looking for them. Montague, Hinchinbrook, Hawkins. So Hawkins and Hinchinbrook don't even make up the same amount of hunters as Western Prince William Sound. So that's how that breaks down. And then you can see that the effort changes, particularly in these years of big snow. Basically, everyone and their grandma goes hunting in Cordova. Maybe grandma doesn't actually get on the boat, but you pick up a proxy form for her. So you can see on Hawkins in 2011, we get a huge spike here, and we had a nice big spike in 21 as well. That year I was talking about 2016 that had the big jump. Most of that was on Montague. And so a lot of non-residents hit Montague that year, and I don't really know why. But that you can see that volatility from year to year. It's often driven by weather, but sometimes probably other conditions maybe going on with transporters or other commercial uses. So the harvest, as I mentioned, the harvest survey data was broken down by hunt area, but now only about 70% of our reports come in at that level. And that's when you get an email from Samantha. It's trying to get that level of detail that we would really like. So this results in 200 to 300 follow-up emails a year. And a surprising number of people are very irritated. Like, I already told you that I went hunting on Hawkins Island, and they're like, okay, I know, but it just a little more. So Rocky Bay and Zykov really an area with the highest average number of deer hunters. But you can also see Perry Island really gets a lot of pressure. Naked Island gets a lot of pressure too. Green Island always gets a lot of pressure. And then this is, around Boswell Bay, Hook Point, public use cabins, and just a lot of residential cabins there. Then of course Hawkins with the presence of us here in Cordova. Okay, so why do wildlife managers exist? Well, all we can really hope to do is level out some of these wild population swings, but we can't necessarily always do that. I mean, thought to do that, like, you harvest more when times are really good, and then you hold back when times are bad. But in this situation where we know the weather is like one thing we just really can't control, there's not much that can be done except aid recovery from a big event. And so short of being a Marvel action hero like Storm and harnessing the weather, I just have to focus on really trying to identify when harvest is compensatory or additive. So what this means is like, there's always the argument that, well, all these deer got shot, but they were all going to die anyways. And maybe a lot of those deer would have died if there's a lot of mouths to feed and they don't have access to food. But the animal that a hunter chooses in that scenario is not the same animal that winter chooses. Because if you're looking at the beach and you've got 5 animals, which one are you going to pick? You're not going to pick the one that looks like a bone raft that's laying down that doesn't want to move. You're going to pick the one that looks robust and fattest of the bunch. And that's probably a doe, and that's probably the one that's going to make it. And so we just recently had this conversation down in Southeast because they got dumped on with snow. There was pressure to extend the deer season, but everybody knows the rain could be coming, and we don't want to put more mortality when there's already been some on the animals that are most likely to survive. And that's why here we've focused on just making a faster build. Constitutional mandate on the state side says that we have to treat all Alaskan residents the same from a subsistence use standpoint. And that's why the federal season exists, is because the federal government determines that a resident user has different privileges. So yeah, when do we use closures? Well, big winters that follow when deep and early snow could lead to high harvest and the population is already low. If we want to reduce the harvest on females to make the difference between a 3-year recovery, or yeah, overall harvest during these years can exceed what winter mortality has been. That's always what I wonder about 21 and 11 is just how many would we have really seen as big of a drop if we hadn't also had more hunters? So these blue bars are our Unit 6 residents, and this should be 21. More hunters killed 5 deer that year than any other bag limit, including 0. If they went hunting at all, they're represented somewhere on this graphic. More hunters killed 5 deer that year than any other bag limit. And so you always wonder, like, how would the drop have been as big? I don't know. So what can you do? Well, you can report your harvest on your harvest ticket report card or online and provide the best detail that you can. And usually this is just to like a bay or a creek level. That's great. We don't need to have GPS coordinates. It's actually a little harder for us because we only got to go and plot it. But if you get us to a bay level or a creek level, that's just beautiful. And that just really helps us understand that hunting pressure and how that's changing over time. It also helps us answer a lot of questions. Lately, there's been a lot of questions about transporters bringing deer hunters to specific areas where there's a lot of local use. And people want to know, like, where are these people taking clients? Well, I can't answer that if I don't have good harvest data. So encourage others to also report. There's a long-time hunters in Cordova that kill a lot of deer, that we don't have a single record in their entire 30 years of hunting of them ever killing deer. So provide your hunt data. It really helps. In hard winters, try to select the animals that are most likely to die, which are, there's a lot of times you can see fawns that have already been, their doe has already been taken. That fawn's not going to make it. Also selecting bucks, because bucks are most, they come out of the rut in really poor body condition. And so they have a lower chance of survival. And honestly, I know it's guys hate when I say this in meetings, but like, you don't need that many bucks on the scene to take care of your business. And so they're a little bit superfluous. Sorry, it's true. Share your observations about deer. So like that deer that came in today, that was super interesting. I love to pull teeth. I can get teeth aged, especially since we're doing a big moose project right now and sending off batches of teeth anyway. So I like to pull teeth on animals. I like to just inspect their teeth. I have way too many teeth photos on my phone. If you don't believe me, I'll show you. Yeah, just generally like how many deer you're seeing, how you think the buck doe or fawn doe ratio looks compared to other times. If you're seeing a lot of fawns, if you're seeing a lot of twins, if you're finding a lot of dead animals, If you see animals that are diseased or otherwise have abnormalities, you want to share a weather observation, like, yeah, just how much snow you're seeing in different places. Any of that helpful to me. I love to geek out on this stuff, so my door is always open, and share. You can also get involved with fish and game issues through our local advisory committee. So they meet a couple times a year. We really need more young people that are invested in long-term use of these resources to get engaged in the decision-making process. It's not super onerous. Like I said, it's just a couple times a year, and it can really shape your destiny. And you can come help. As you saw the hand shoot up, we use volunteers often to do some really fun work. So if you ever want to volunteer, we do deer pellet transects and camera checks in the early summer. And sometimes that works out before gill net openers are really going strong. It just matters what kind of winter we have. But I'm also looking to hire someone. So if you know of a young person that's interested in a career in wildlife biology, I would like to hire that person. I would like to have them help me classify images and use the artificial intelligence. I also have 3 or 4 master's projects in a can. I have so much data that has been collected that I could just hand that to a student and they could take it and run. And so if you know a young person that's interested in being in this field, have them come talk to me. I would love nothing more to get some great Cordova students involved in this profession. So talk to me or Samantha at Fish and Game if you've got good lead on that. There's also, graduate intern opportunities. And here's another thing that Milo may or may not have. Okay, I'm ready for your question. Who's got one?
Charlotte, have you separated out or do you have any data for the transported hunters and or guided hunters?
I do, because I thought that question might come. About 2% of the harvest on Hawkins is from transported user, people that check. You know how when you do your harvest, your hunt report, it asks you if you use commercial services that are transported to the field. The 2% of the harvest on Hawkins Island is from transported users. 14% of Hinchinbrook is transported users. I think most of those Hinchinbrook are probably etches and hook points. But there are surely other spots, where people are dropping them off. But yeah.
How about the Western Sound, like people being guided out where you're transported?
Yeah. That's heavy. That's a lot of transported use. I didn't bring those figures, but I mean, it's shifted a little bit because during the pandemic, a lot of people bought boats, use crafts and whatnot. And so I think that probably elevated the number of people that are fully self-supported, but there's always a lot of transported users as part of that. Not very many guided users, but transported, yeah.
Are you interested in anything like citizen science from trail cams for those of us who have property on the islands? We set up something here.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, it's maybe hard. So I would say any anecdotal interesting things you see, that's always cool. Like, 40% of the does I saw with fawns had twins or something like that. That's really cool to get that kind of stuff. Figuring out how that could be plugged into this greater mission that uses AI, that's harder because we have this whole sampling scheme. We're trying not to underrepresent based on different habitat types. But I welcome any of that stuff. So my dream is to do a diet study. And that could really be citizen science, is if we just had Keegan Crowley actually did this as a science project when he was in high school. He handed out these little glass vials. I think maybe Clay did one, and he just had you scoop a little bit of rumen out of the stomach of the deer, put a little cap on it. I mean, it's kind of gross because you got to deal with the rumen, but he got a number of people to collect those samples from, and that's how we know that sweet gale is a fairly prevalent in their diet. So it's really interesting to me. It would be really interesting to look at that variability and like how much kelp do you find in their stomachs? How much hemlock do you find in their stomachs? Does that correlate with winter conditions? I see a real role that citizen science could play in that. I'm not gonna go kill hundreds of deer to get those samples, but people are. So, yeah, I don't know. Let's stop. Okay.
You want to talk about how people's individual harvest information is not public?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't want to give us individual information because they think we give it out, but
Yeah.
that's not the case.
Yeah, so any information that's shared with us, we protect it so much to the point that like I don't share harvest records with forces. And they don't share harvest records with me. So like people that kill moose with a federal permit, I get wiped data when it comes to me. This is how many moose are dead. This is how they hunted, how many days, what they used, but it doesn't say who that person was. And so, and then I never disseminate data in a highly specialized way. So I get a million phone calls of like, well, where should I go goat hunting? Where should I go deer hunting? Pam gets these, she intercepts most of them, so I don't have to, but if you were, where would you go? Well, no one's asked me that before. So, and we basically, we're very aware of the possibility that we could steer pressure very easily, and we don't want to do that. So the information I'll share is generalized to at least drainage level. We're not going to go any more refined than that. We're not talking bays, we're not talking creeks. We are no finer than what we call a uniform coding unit, and that's drainages. So we're very careful about that, and we get some pressure, but we're pretty firm about it.
How many pilots are you interacting with for an average season?
Oh, it's like, so transporters have no requirement to talk to Fish and Game about what they're doing. They don't register with us. They don't have to report to us in any way. That's handled by a completely different agency. So I get phone calls of like, who could I have fly me out to Hook Point? I know full well who most of our operators are, but we won't give that information. We'll tell them, talk to Chamber of Commerce, and they'll give you a list of people who operate boats and have business licenses that do these kinds of things. So as far as pilots that I've talked to, I've got my pilots that I work with for my biology. But I don't talk to a lot of other pilots, and unless they have hunting questions, and if they ask a hunting question and they're like Sam had one today, where can I land in this area? And she's like, well, you need to talk to plane people for that. That's not what we're in the business of. So is that what you mean?
It's just been a large increase. Like shoot hunting in the area.
Right.
That's what I'm asking. You get a lot of inquiries from pilots. I'm just seeing a large increase.
Right.
We're getting a lot more people calling about moose, I would say, this year, and goats. A lot of people calling about goats this year.
Yeah. And it's also hard to kind of like gauge things by phone calls over time because people are changing in how they get information. The days where people would call a Fish and Game office and try to get information it's a lot of people aren't getting their information that way anymore. They're going to YouTube University, they're checking the forums, they're talking to their buddies, but a lot of them aren't calling us. So yeah, I'm aware that there's been some changes down at Boswell, but I don't have a way to like. Actually, we could look at the hunt reports as far as if there has been a change in aircraft usage over time that's for there. And so like an example of when we've done that before is like with moose and the martin, we talked about, well, how many people use an airboat? How many people use a jet boat? How many people are using their highway vehicle? We could go through a similar exercise in that area, particularly if someone was wanting to seek a regulatory change. So if someone wanted to make it to where you can same day airborne any island but Hinchinbrook or something.
So this discussion came up at the AC. That's
Yeah. Then we could populate that. We could produce the numbers that inform that discussion.
Well,
When you have issues with your data, like when it's the rain and you're transecting or cameras failing, So the data is showing a decline, but your sense is that that might not be accurate. How do you make that call about whether to do an emergency intervention?
I'd say with so much in wildlife biology is imprecise, as the tools that we have are generally not very sensitive. And then we always have confidence intervals associated with them, even if we don't know what they are. So I always have to apply kind of a BS detector to any number that I collect. But in this case, because there's not a lot of scenarios under which I would take management action, it's not super critical to know. And one of the big questions that comes up is, how many deer do we have in Prince William Sound? Like, nobody knows. We might never know. But would knowing change anything that I do right now? And it would, because I can't just like set a harvest quota and be like, here's the appropriate number of deer. Because appropriate number of deer is constantly changing based on what kind of winter conditions deer are exposed to. There's a broad range of animals that, depending on what winter brings. So yeah, and I say I use a suite of pieces together to try to decide, but in most scenarios, I'm not gonna do anything. It's only if we've had conclusively a real bad winter, and then we start to see like, oh man, winter's shaping up to be bad again. It's more about weather numbers than deer numbers that tracks that.
Sounds like weather's the biggest factor, but what is the what do the predators look like? And you see any disease or parasites or ticks or?
Yeah, predation, I don't think is a huge part of the puzzle, but I don't have like, we would have to do a cause specific mortality study to know. Obviously, bears can kill the heck out of fawns if they so desire, and I found scats that had like all the little hooves in them, like clearly it happens. And I'm sure that, in Kodiak, they talk about this Pavlovian response that the deer have. They hear a gunshot and they're like, "Ooh, gut pile, like I'm on it." But how much, deer, this is a made up photo, how much deer are really directly preyed upon by bears, we really don't know. But I don't think it's a huge factor. That's my gut, but because I think if it was, I think it would have been really hard for this population to build. We've got bears all over the sound. I think black bears can be a bigger limiter of deer than brown bears, but the worst places to be a deer are the best places to be a black bear. Like, there's just not a ton of overlap between them. So I don't think it's much of a factor. In the Western Sound, the snow's killing them before the bears have a chance.
So you're,
Disease.
Oh, sorry. Oh, and the disease part? I have never I've never seen anything or submitted anything that has given us any positives that we didn't know about as naturally occurring in the population. And I would say compared with other animal populations I've observed, that they don't seem to have a lot of yuckies, and no ticks. So everyone in Alaska is very worried about winter tick, which affects moose. And there's this play between white-tailed deer and moose. And when we're having these really mild winters in like Minnesota type area, it's making it to where the deer and the moose are sharing. They're interacting in a way that they normally wouldn't. If cold conditions were occurring, they would segregate and the moose would not be exposed to the ticks that the deer have. That's not happening, so the moose are getting the ticks, and for some reason, it really hurts them a lot more. And so they're losing a lot of moose to winter tick. And so Alaska has been very concerned to monitor winter ticks. So there is a submitted tick program. If you get a tick on the dogs or yourself or whatever, I submitted 3 ticks this summer, and they were all our native squirrel or hare ticks. So we have not had any of the bad ticks that are like your Lyme disease or spotted what is it, Rocky Mountain spotted fever or the moose tick. We haven't had those show up. But if you're getting sick and you're worried about it, sure, I will. Was that all of the
Yes.
components of that? Okay.
So just curious what information you have about the deer on the mainland side.
So people ask me about this all the time, particularly people that don't have boats. They're like, what are the chances of a deer on the mainland? And the main thing I tell them is like, I expect that when we've had a number of mild winters, we're gonna have more deer on the mainland. We know that young deer particularly disperse, and that they wanna go to find new places, right? And so, but we also know that when we don't have that maritime influence that makes more of that precipitation fall as rain than snow, that's gonna happen on the mainland. We're gonna get more snow on the mainland, so it's just gonna be a harder place to be a deer. If you're a nice, big, robust deer and you can get nice and fat, you could feel like a seriously beautiful trophy animal on the mainland. But you could also just get back by the snow. So it's possible to find animals and find really great animals that haven't experienced much hunting pressure. But I just wouldn't bet my life on it. And if I really need to put one in my freezer, your chances of just interacting or just finding one are just lower. But people can find them. Okay.
Oh, it was kind of the mainland question. So, what you're saying is it's more of a weather environmental condition as opposed to more coyotes on the mainland as opposed to on the island or something like that. You're not seeing that being a factor of limiting the mainland population.
I think it's snow more than coyotes, but there is some coyote stuff. I mean, we killed one just a week or so ago because it had been chomped on and was limping around town and it's a rough scene. So I wouldn't think, and it's weird because I don't think of coyotes as being very coordinated hunters. With that deer, they had just inflicted enough harm that eventually it was gonna die. Weeks for it to happen. And, I'm not gonna I'd had 3 calls about it, wasn't gonna just get more bad deer somewhere on me. But yeah, it's always, and occasionally we'll have deer end up on the ice and I'm like, how did you get here? Like, someone bumped you with your car? Did the coyotes run you down? Like what? I don't know, again, without like a cause specific mortality study, I can't say how much coyotes really contribute to that. But they can definitely induce enough harm that eventually, the deer will die. Good question.
was thinking about Kinsey's question about the trail cams.
Uh-huh.
I'm wondering if it'd be useful to have like a written protocol for trail cam users for the way they should do it to be more valuable to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that would take care of the like inconsistencies in collection. It wouldn't really, I'd have to like think of how to incorporate it into just sample design. But yeah, like that would help and just to standardize the way they're set. Yeah. Ray, were you stretching?
Oh, I was gonna add to the coyote thing. I've been doing a lot of mainland hiking and I've seen a lot more coyote activity these last 2 years than I have in the past. And it just seems like it just must be an uptick of the coyote pressure. Because every time I hiked in the areas, I've seen a lot of, one time you go up, you'll see good deer sign, and then all of a sudden, one set of coyote tracks, then 3, 4 sets, and then no deer sign until they just push them out there. Whether they're super successful on killing them all the time, it doesn't seem like to coyote kill from here, but a bunch of time that they've done pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, and usually, when I get to a dead deer, it's been pretty big, playing some amazing house quickly. Eagles and coyotes and whatever else can clean them off, but you don't know if the coyote killed them or the coyote just ate them when they found them. And some, especially when they're on the ice, like they just punch through and get kind of stuck and, with our, you just can't tell. I always cut a long bone though, and that's the thing. If you find something and you're like, ooh, Charlotte would be interested in this, cut a femur or a humerus just with a hatchet or a saw, and you can take a picture of the bone marrow inside. I really love seeing that because that's an indication of how close that animal was to starvation. And so that's always a question of like, did this animal just die because it was just old and it was its time? Pictures of the teeth and cutting a long bone. Those are two things I really like. You cut a bone and the inside of it looks like cold shortening or cold lard. That is a healthy animal that had a lot of fat reserve. But if you cut a long bone and the inside looks like raspberry jam or like marmalade, that's an animal that was dying or died of starvation. And last year I cut a long bone on a wolverine for the first time. And because someone found just a randomly dead wolverine and it was in starvation mode. And I thought that was fascinating because if it's an easy winter for all your ungulates because there was no snow, it's probably a terrible winter to be a scavenger. But he could have had some other injuries that's make it hard to make a living. Uh-huh,
Yeah, just, like that,
uh-huh.
a lot of areas, you cut a tree down, the deer are just thick and they're eating the moss off of it. I said, could blacktail do that? Do they eat the I know there's a lot of moss.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't tried that experiment. But they can definitely eat those arboreal lichens and whatnot. But I don't see why not. I don't know if it's something they would be like, it sounds like maybe you observed them being hungry for it.
Yeah.
Really coming in.
Wherever.
Yeah.
Where there's trees and, I didn't even notice until it's rancher said something about it.
Uh-huh.
On Montague, like, hunted it like 45 years ago. We hunted the west side of it.
Mm-hmm.
One side of it's better than the other.
Hmm.
I said, but anyway, yeah, there was like 2 inches of fat on
Mm.
the rumps of every deer.
Okay, yeah, and wonder if they taste different when they're eating some of these mosses. They're somehow nutritional different.
Something I did notice in these past years, when we disturbed the sand out at Edgebrook by the cabins, the deer seem to really push toward that. There's anything, I guess, behind that.
I
I
mean,
found it
other,
fascinating, because yeah, as soon as somebody like does a different road, some tree, it seems like the deer really like the new turn of sand.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, in other parts of the world, salt licks are a huge thing for animals that they need different minerals they're not getting from other places. And I kind of feel like if you're living on the ocean, you probably have a ton of different options for getting salt into your diet, but I've always wondered, especially about some of those other trace minerals. I know with goats, we've talked, a file that I work with down in Southeast has reported selenium deficiencies in those animals. So they could be pursuing any number of minerals that they know that they need. They don't know why, but they feel compelled to lick something. And that would be my guess. But. Okay. Well, if you have more questions or just want to chat, my door's always open. I love to geek out on this stuff, so please come by. Thanks for coming.